Metallica is turning 40 this month, which is pretty incredible, and it's happening without a lot of fanfare when you consider that for their 30th anniversary in 2011, they had 4 nights of amazing concerts in San Francisco at the Fillmore with a literal who's who of special guests who had been associated with their long history as a band. King Diamond, Glenn Danzig, Jason Newsted, of course, John Bush of Armored Saint and Anthrax, Dave Mustaine, just to name a metal few. So that's going to be hard to top, but they are doing 2 special shows in the Bay Area at the Chase Center in December, so it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens at those gigs. And my UCR comrade, Bryan Rolli, he is here with me tonight, and we're going to launch into the first of a 2-part roundtable discussion looking at Metallica at 40. And so we've got, to help us do that, we've got a couple of special guests for this first part. So our first guest has a new book out on Metallica, which came out at the end of this past summer, and it's called Metallica, the $24.95 book. And when I heard that title, I was just like, okay, I got to meet this guy. And Ben, what I really respect about your book is that it's not just another Metallica book. It really does take an interesting and in-depth look at the band's history from some intriguing angles, using a perspective that at times I would say it's a bit academic without being stuffy in a way that makes you go, look, I just want to read about Metallica. And Ben is already hard at work on his next book, which is going to be part of the 33 1/3 series of books focused on Body Count's 1992 self-titled debut, which turns 30 next year. So Ben Apatoff is with us, joining from the New York area. And Ben, so important question here. Will that Body Count book be in our hands for the 30th anniversary? And what can you tell us about kind of where things are at with that presently?
It will not be. That was part of my goal, was to get it in there. But I remember actually reading something that Ann Powers wrote about the 50th anniversary of Blue by Joni Mitchell, and reading her piece and it going into like, Blue and how great it is. And then she said, and also I've got a book about it coming out, and thinking, you know what? I bet that was meant for the 50th anniversary. It's not a huge deal if it doesn't get out in time for that. So it'll be out in 2023. But it's been great to work on. Ice-T is fascinating, and there's so many. He's such a hustler, and he means so much to so many people in different ways, and it's been fascinating to read about. And it's an important part of history that hasn't been written in a book before. It's the first book about body counts. It's been a lot of fun to write.
Awesome. And so our other guest for the first installment of the Roundtable has been doing the podcast Let There Be Talk for a decade now, which is huge. You're going to also find him hosting the Dark Fonzie podcast, his collaboration with Mark Maron, and the Grail podcast, and he is the founder, I love this, of the Cactus Radio Network, and he has been on an absolute tear recently with guests on Let There Be Talk, including A&R legend Jason Flom, Zach Wilde, who of course you know from Black Label Society and Ozzy, Tommy Shaw of Styx, and drum guru Josh Freese is his latest episode. And I should also mention he had Nikki Sixx, which is just an awesome episode here in the past couple weeks. And if you want to loop back just a bit further, he had the guys from AC/DC on to reveal their newest record. And in the midst of a great series on the Bay Area thrash scene, he had just an epic chat with Kirk Hammett. So the candles are most certainly lit for Dean Delray, and they continue to blaze brightly. Dean, joining us in the midst of 14 shows in Las Vegas. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm right up the street from one of the Metal Kings, Bryan Slagle. So, yeah. So whenever I'm in Vegas, I think of Bryan Slagle because he loves it here so much.
I appreciate you joining us because right after I sent you a note seeing if you could join, then I hit your website. And I'm like, oh, man, he's in the midst of a gazillion shows of Las Vegas. And I was like waiting for the note to come back. And like almost about 2 minutes later, you write back and you're like, I'm in. So Very cool. What is that, the Comedy Cellar where you are all week?
Yeah, the Comedy Cellar. It's besides the Comedy Store in San Francisco, the Comedy Cellars in New York, and now in Vegas, it's the most prestigious comedy club in America. The Store and the Cellar are that's it, man. That's the cream of the crop. So to be part of that family is just an honor, man. And, I love it. I don't like Vegas, but I love the Comedy Cellar. So I'll do whatever they say. Kind of like your magazine, Ultimate Classic Rock, that I love that. And so I get a lot of people always ask me to be on stuff, and I say no most of the time because I'm just fucking swamped, man.
Yeah.
And I do 4 podcasts. I tour all over doing stand-up, and in the middle of all that, I'm booking the guests, I'm booking the gigs, I'm editing it's just crazy, So But I love Metallica and I love you guys, so I'm here.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. And, I mentioned it, but the Cactus Radio Network, I love that you kind of have this little empire that's starting to blossom. Like, I know that you now have, like, at least one podcast beyond the 3 that you host. Like, so are there plans to kind of further expand that out?
I'll look at any show as long as it's something kind of original. So Byron Katie, who I'm doing right now, is that's Ross Robinson's mother. Ross Robinson
wow.
is a famous producer who did Korn and Limp Bizkit and At the Drive-In and even The Cure and Glassjaw and all these classic records. And it's funny because I always wondered where he got kind of his guru style of producing. I've been in the studio, watch him work, and he's really kind of like, well, where are you right now? What's inside you? And for a while, I was like, this guy's corny as shit. And then I was like, actually, he's the real deal, and he's getting some of the greatest records of the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, At the Drive-In's record, Relationship at Command, could be one of the greatest records ever made, hands down. And he made that record. So there you go, So his mom is kind of a spiritual guru, kind of a female, Tony Robbins type of stuff. And it was a fit for me. I was like, this is way outside the box. And I'd like to have somebody that was way into architecture or an architect that has a podcast, that kind of stuff that's not really being done,
Yeah, I mean, you're one of those guys that, like, what I love about your podcast is, like, when you're talking to folks, you just veer into, like, a lot of unexpected areas. And they're like, so the Josh Freese chat, there you guys are talking about the price of Long Beach real estate. I'm like, how does he know this shit? And so then, of course, later in the podcast, like, you get into the fact that you actually were looking in the area. But it's like, you pull a lot of, like, really interesting stuff from interesting places. So I think that that's what's great about Let There Be Talk is you never quite know where it's going to go. You can look and go, okay, he's going to talk to Kirk Hammett, but it's like I can already look and tell you that Dean is not going to do the traditional interview with Kirk Hammett that everybody else has always done. So that's really cool. So I talked to Mark Maron just about 3 or 4 years ago, and I put this question to him, and I'll put it to you as we get into things. You've had so many folks on the podcast 10 years in, so who are kind of, to borrow the name of your other podcast partially, who are some of the Holy Grail guests that you're still trying to get on?
I mean, I got, hundreds of guests that I still want to have. I only have guests on that have completely inspired me in life.
Yeah.
I don't have any kind of press junket style guests. I try to do a body of work type of podcast that, like, if you listen to it 5 years from now, it's not like, so the new album's out this week. I don't really care about that type of stuff. I care more about somebody's journey and what it meant to me. So there's a lot of people. I'd love to have Sean Penn, Francis Ford Coppola. I've been trying to get Matt Dillon for 10 years. I would love to have James Hetfield, of course. I don't think anybody's ever gotten the ultimate Who Are You, David Lee Roth interview without him turning on that David Lee Roth. That kind of stuff interests me. And, there's so many guests. I mean, Nick Cave, come on, man. Who doesn't want to talk to that? These type of guys that don't do interviews, those are the ones that really interest me. But, like when I talk to Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, I mean, this guy doesn't do interviews. So to sit down with somebody like that and make sure that they're comfortable. I mean, John Mayer, I couldn't stand his music all my life, and then I was just wrong, and I admitted it. And he's
become
guy.
A friend.
Oh, yeah, and he hadn't done an interview in 7 years, and he texted me and said, hey, I want to do a long-form interview, and I want to do it on your show. And that was fucking incredible, So it also, there's guests out there that really interest me, and I just keep chasing after it,
Yeah. Well, Let's start with you because I think you're the one here that goes back furthest with the band. So how does Metallica enter your orbit?
Well, of course, I played music in San Francisco, and they come into the scene. I don't really start seeing Metallica till about the first year. I'm not one of those guys that can say I was at the first 10 gigs. Like Brian Slagle, man, he saw Hetfield with no guitar, which would have been a crime if that band stayed that way. Ooh, but I start, seeing them at the Stone, and you've got that whole scene starting to underground brew. Of course, I'm into the heavier, darker stuff. At the same time, I was into glam rock also. So I wasn't one of those guys that was like kill posers or metal sucks or anything. I liked it all. I went from Santana to Earth, Wind and Fire to Metallica. So I was always seeking out anything, but I was playing a lot of gigs at the Mabuhay, and of course Dead Kennedys were really, grinding it out and killing it. And that kind of thing was going on, the punk. And this was just kind of progressing from that, So I was seeking, of course, something heavier, especially, the masterpiece Bonded by Blood.
Yeah. And once Metallica gets past kind of the initial lineup shuffles with Lloyd Grant for a minute and some recording, Ron McGovney and Dave Mustaine, Kirk Hammett comes in and replaces Mustaine. The lineup, like this hit me the other day, the lineup stays remarkably intact for most of the 40 years. There is, of course, the monumental loss of bassist Cliff Burton. Jason Newsted comes in after Cliff to carry things forward from a bass perspective until 2001. And beginning in 2003, Robert Trujillo has been the band's bassist for nearly 20 years since then, and he already had a spot in Metallica's lineage, having toured with the band as an opener with Suicidal Tendencies. So the point here is, I think that each one of those guys has moved the Metallica sound forward in interesting ways. So I'm curious with each of you, how do you think Metallica kind of evolved as a band with each one of those bass player changes? And I'll start with you, Ben.
Well, it's interesting. I think that each time they got the best bassist they could have possibly gotten for them. With Jason, they got kind of a kid, and by the time they need Robert, they want like an adult. Like Metallica is going into like adult age, and they don't want like some young hotshot. But, one thing that's fascinating to me is that if you listen to like the Saint Anger era, or like the Ramones covers on the B-sides with Bob Rock, who's clearly like an incredibly talented musician. It has great musical sensibilities, has a lot of skill with Metallica, but also does not have the kind of chemistry they need to thrive, the way that Jason does, the way that Robert does, the way that Cliff does. And you can hear it because someone can be monumentally talented the way that Bob is, but with Metallica's bassist, they need someone who they can thrive with. And I think that Jason takes them to the next level where he's not like a Cliff clone, but he's doing his different thing. And, same with Robert, where you watch in Some Kind of Monster where he, does battery and has that flourish at the end. I mean, they need someone who pushes them in a different way. I think they're good at finding someone who has that chemistry with them, which has helped them thrive.
Yeah, and Bryan, like Dean, you're a fellow musician, so like I'm interested in your, kind of perspective, like watching that kind of unfold, like, what you think of all that.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest and most important difference right off the bat between Cliff and Jason is that Cliff played with his fingers and Jason played with a pick. And I think for the different phases that they were at in their career, that made a pretty big difference. I think that Cliff brought kind of a subtle, understated groove to their sound. And I think that really helped with the certain looseness that is still there on those first three albums. Even as they were getting radically better at their instruments, there's still a looseness there, even as they were all tightening up their sound in unison. Cliff also had, a great musical knowledge, and I think he taught the other guys a lot about songwriting and about musical theory in their early days. I mean, Cliff really helped elevate the overall musicianship of that band at a time when they really needed that. As far as Jason, I think I've always thought that Jason Newsted was, it sounds funny to say this because he was in Metallica, but I think he's one of the most underrated bassists, only because he was playing in Cliff Burton's shadow. But as Metallica was, writing naughtier, more progressive songs on And Justice for All, even though you can't really hear Jason's contributions on that record, he was keeping up with them. He was contributing to that evolution. And I mean, their sound changed radically throughout the 90s, but Jason was able to grow with them and hold that sound down. And Ben, I really liked what you said about Rob. I was like trying to figure out what I, wanted to say about Rob, because I think he's an excellent bassist and an excellent member of Metallica, but you're totally right. By that point in their career, they needed somebody who was like an adult, somebody who had like been around the block, so to speak, somebody who could play now this huge catalog of songs effortlessly, kind of dabble in both styles, and accomplish both, but was also willing to try out different things and go in new directions. And I think just like a good dude, like they just needed a guy who was like a great musician, a good team player, and just like somebody who seems to be pretty fun company, because they were so unstable at that time. They needed someone to kind of keep them grounded. And so I think, like you said, Metallica has had a knack for finding some of the best bassists around at each phase of their career.
Yeah, and Dean, I think if I'm correct, the Jason era and Justice, is that your favorite era? Like, so as a guy that like has seen all the eras, like how do you kind of process all this?
Well, Jason is, he's the Bryan Johnson of Metallica. And that's bottom line, is exactly who he is. You got all these kind of buffoons that are like, once Cliff is gone, fuck Metallica, which is lunacy, which is absolute lunacy. Then you got the other buffoons that are like, Black Album sucks. Completely insane. I could sit here and talk to you for 10 hours on how amazing Cliff is. We all know that. We all know Masters is a masterpiece. And I saw Cliff many times. And the most epic was the day in the green when the complete tides changed. And it was, here's the new kings of the scene, But for me, I think that Jason is the greatest all-around bass player for Metallica ever. For one of the things that no one ever talks about is his singing. Now, they could really use Jason singing right now, because he added so much depth to those backgrounds, and those second parts that are on the records. And it's so monumental when you watch, like, the Seattle shows and all those eras, the Black Album eras with Jason, and you watch him singing this stuff. No one ever talks about that, ever. But it's fucking great. And it makes this band another level. And that's the bottom line, because no one else sings in that band. Even Rob, he tries, but it's nowhere near the confidence of Jason. He used to sing like Hit the Lights or one of them, he would sing a track and just kill it.
Absolutely. And something else that I'll throw out to, whichever one of you wants to tackle this, because it's just like, I think it's something that needs to be said, but like, Kirk Hammett gets a lot of shit from some people, and I think that's totally unfair.
That's absurd.
Like, I think,
I covered that when I interviewed him. I mean, I watched this guy. I've probably seen Metallica over 100 times. And this guy never makes a mistake. And these songs are so in-depth, and the solos are so long, and there's so much there. And they're like, all right, tonight we're going to just whip this one out. And he has the solos down perfect. It's insane. His tone is amazing, and his vibe, his look. He's not some old tumbleweed over there. He's always got great guitars, great outfits, great gear. The guy is a crusher, man, and he's a superhuman.
Ben, Bryan, either you want a piece of that stuff?
I mean, anybody who has any criticisms of Kirk Hammett, I would just say go put on the Creeping Death solo. I mean, that's one of the best solos in metal history, the history of electric guitar, as far as I'm concerned. And Kirk is a talented musician. Obviously, he's an excellent lyrical guitar player. You can hum every single one of his solos. They're an integral component of the song. And even as the band simplified its sound a little bit, his solos got more expressive and they became even more important elements of the song. Like, I love watching that documentary, A Year and a Half of the Life of Metallica, where he's going like 9 rounds with Bob Rock, and Bob Rock just keeps grilling him and grilling him and grilling him to write these better solos. And obviously he's so pissed off about it, but in the end he comes up with some of the best work he's ever done. And yeah, Dean, you nailed it. I mean, he can still play. He plays everything like it's written and like it's performed on the record, and he's an excellent performer, and he's just solid. Like, there are a lot of great guitar players who are really inconsistent live, and Kirk is not one of them.
And he could easily have an ego, you know, like, I think that's why Rob fits in there, because Rob and Kirk are the, oh, we're here, we get it, it's your guys' vision, and we'll bring what we can bring to the plate. And if you had a guy like an Yngwie over there, which would be ridiculous anyway, just and an ego, like a perfect example is Dave Mustaine, the band wouldn't be going on their 40-year anniversary right now. They would be completely done like 20 years ago from egos, you know?
Yeah, the lack of ego. You bring up a real good point, Dean, because I got a chance to talk to Kirk and Robert when they were in town here in Cleveland at the Rock Hall for a thing just before the pandemic. And I was talking to them about like the origins of those cover songs that they jam on midway through the show, where it's like what it evolved to is they started like doing songs that had some sort of relevance to the city. So here in Cleveland, they played like something from the James Gang, so stuff like that. And just speaking to what you said about them being humble folks, I think it was either Robert or Kirk that talked about the science of why they do that, and he ultimately compared it to, as they're traveling to all these different like areas and countries, he's like, we feel like street musicians. And like he just was like talking about like what the two of them get when they are actually there in the different areas as musicians, and not even just on stage. Like, they go out to explore like the local music and the culture of wherever they are. And that's how deeply they're embedded in what they do. And I think that's huge, you know, as far as like who they are as musicians. And it's like you hear them say that, and it's not surprising when you take that and then match it up with who they are as players. It makes complete sense. It's like, okay, that's just one more way that these guys have just proved to us like how dedicated they are to the cause.
Yeah. I would like to see Metallica push their self in some other ways. You know, I think they are a little comfortable now in this deep end of their career. They just tour, and I get it, but I'd like to see them get out of the round. I've seen them in the last 10 years, 15 years, once in a great while, coming straight at you again. And there's nothing more powerful than that. And I'd also like to see them go back to using the amps instead of the, the processed amps, actual heads with cabinets moving air off the stage. I would like to see that and push themselves back into that. I'd also like to see them work with Fleming again to see what would happen secretly, see if they could get some kind of weirdness all these years later out of that, because after Justice, which I think is a masterpiece, I would have liked to seen where it went after that. Of course, the Black Album, I love it. But it would be cool to see him work with Fleming or something, something like that again.
The other guy that catches some flack in the Metallica lineup, and I guess they all do in some form, but there are folks that sling flack at Lars. And I've also heard it said, which I totally agree, and Ben, I'd love to start and hear your thoughts on this. I totally agree that they would not be the band that they are without Lars. Like, Lars adds a very special swing and secret sauce to the sound of Metallica that just would not be right with any other drummer. It's like, you know what? It was cool, like, seeing Joy Jordison step in and, like, play with Metallica, stuff like that that's happened over the years. Cool. But every time I see Lars play, like, there's just a certain thing that he adds and a certain enthusiasm. Like, I think that's one thing that, like, comes through when you see these massive box sets that they've been putting out, like, most recently, the Black Album box. Like, Lars is the fan and the hoarder of the group that has held on to every like aspect. And Newsted talked about this in the unboxing video for the Black Album. He's like, I used to see Lars saving all this stuff and it was annoying, but he's like, now that I see these box sets, he's like, I get it. But that kind of like just like underlines the love that Lars still has for his band, and it's correct, as we all know. He and James, like, it's their band, you know. But that love that he has all these years later, like, you see that on every level with Lars.
Definitely. You know, and obviously I think it's better known that he is the business brains behind the band, and
Sure.
you see interviews where they're like, we were children in Sweden not knowing where our next hotel was, where our next show was, who was paying us, and Lars had that all worked out. But, you know, working more on the book, you see that I think his artistry is underappreciated. You know, one thing I say in the book is I think that people who complain about Lars's drumming are also likely to tell you that David Lee Roth can't sing or that Kurt Cobain can't play guitar, you know. And it's just, they do he has a distinct original chemistry. He's very song-driven, you know. I remember reading the Bob Seger talking about the Turn the Page cover. Like, I love what they did, particularly the drums. You know, Bob Seger is like a real songsmith, very, like, you know, song-driven, can appreciate something like that. And just, like, you know, the drums are something completely different than what we're doing. It's like a song inside the song. And Lars has is very song-driven, kind of like, you know, Dave Grohl Nirvana, where he's got you see that with his It's Electric show on Sirius XM. He's still, you know, interviewing the White Stripes and LCD Sound System and the Dillinger Escape Plan. He's very, like, into songs and music, and I think that he has a real chemistry with James. And, you know, because, you know, Joey Jordison, who's like a great drummer, can play faster but does not have the same sort of feel. And the thing I'll finish with is that someone asked James about that a while ago and said, do you think Lars is a good drummer? I said, yeah, he'll admit that, and I'm not a good singer, but something happens when we play together. And, you know, that's something happens with the two of them when they're together, with the four of them when they're together.
And that takes us to Hetfield, which the thing that I've really found interesting in this whole, like, Black Album box set reissue cycle is just the revelation that, in a sense, he doesn't fully learn how to, like, really sing until the Black Album, when Bob Rock, like, basically says, hey, you know, you're doubling your vocals and you're essentially putting yourself inside this box. Like, what if I could just get you a good vocal sound with the first vocal that you sing? And it's like, that ends up being, the way Hetfield tells the story on the recent Metallica podcast, like, just totally revelatory for him. So I'll toss things to Bryan to start. Like, you know, when you look at, like, you know, Hetfield vocally, like, your thoughts there.
Oh, I mean, I think James is a monster of a vocalist. And yeah, from the Black Album onward, he became a much more technically gifted singer than I think most people even realize. To sing with that rasp that he has, and to sing with that intensity and with that conviction, it's not something that most singers can do, because there's his technical prowess, but there's also his ability to sell those songs and to interpret those songs, and they just wouldn't sound right with anybody else doing them. And there's a reason that he has influenced so many singers over the last 30 or 40 years, myself included. My high school band, we were a thrash trio, and I did my very best 17-year-old James Hetfield impression for a very long time, and made variable progress. But I mean, I think James is a brilliant vocalist, and in his mid-50s now, he's preserved his voice really well. And I was watching some of the Metro show this afternoon in anticipation of this podcast, and Matt, I think you mentioned it, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but I was amazed at how good he sounded at that show, even better than he did when I saw them in 2017 and 2018.
Yeah, I thought, like, vocally, I thought that he had kind of gotten to a point where I'd definitely seen a show or two where it's just like the old school Hetfield vocals weren't really there. And it's like, and that's been really what's been interesting to me, seeing these shows that they've done since they came back from the pandemic, is like you mentioned the Metro show. And out of those two club shows that they played, because the other one was at the Independent in San Francisco, the Metro one was really the one that just caught me, where it's like, I think these guys and James, like, they're all, like, playing at a higher level than where they were prior to the pandemic. And like, whatever rust they might have had, like I think that some rest appears to have done them good. And if they had rust to shake off, it shook off pretty quickly with that San Francisco show because they were just loaded for bear and just, burning it down there in Chicago. And it really, I don't know. I didn't think I was going to see that particularly from Hetfield again. So I listened to that show again today, and it's just like it's really kind of cool to see the zone that they're in presently.
Yeah, I think James is a great vocalist. I think that you listen to the Blacklist box set or see when people have covered Nothing Else Matters, and in a way he's almost Leonard Cohenish, where he sings well, but everybody thinks like, oh, maybe I could do that better or differently or something like that. And he has like this kind of, and you can't necessarily, but it's he's a sort of empowering vocalist where he is great, but he's, for example, like went to the Guns N' Roses show this summer, and Axl, just like, what a monster, what a great, and, clearly works very hard at it, but also, like, part of me thinks, like, that's someone who's just born to be a rock star. That's someone who's, just like a once-in-a-million gifted, talent. James has something in his voice that makes you feel like he's talented, but also, like, you could kind of do that, too. Like, all of us, anybody who's a passing familiarity of rock radio could do a James Hetfield yeah impression. Yep. It's such a, like, it's such a, it's, such a part of, like, rock music culture now. But, he is a great vocalist. I think you listen to, like, the early demos on the box set. I rate that he feels kind of like a lion cub learning to roar on that, and he's still sort of finding himself as a vocalist. But yeah, you're right. After the Black Album, a very vocal driven record. It's the first one that has beats that people like will rap over. It's very kind of beat driven and vocal driven. But I think he's an incredibly expressive and powerful vocalist.
Dean, I mean, you talked about kind of like that changing of the guard, like just the importance of the Day on the Green show. Like, so if we kind of take that concept and apply it to James, like, what do you think the moment is for him as a singer where he really kind of like crosses over, and what's kind of the hallmark moment for Hetfield where it all comes together?
Well, for me, I think the peak of Hetfield, as far as the ultimate frontman, which I call him, I posted it on my Instagram about 2 months ago. I said, I've seen everybody. And I do think that Hetfield on the Black Album tour was the ultimate frontman I ever saw. And I've seen them all. As far as dangerous, radical, I mean, I do miss that. The friendly Hetfield right now, over the last 20 years, kind of throws me off. I do like how Tom Araya really never changed that character, even though Tom was rich. He was still up there singing South of Heaven like a lunatic. But I think the peak of Hetfield is that Black Album tour. And he was really coming together on the Justice tour where he's angry, he's mad, Cliff's gone, and he's getting more and more radical. And his look is great. He's wearing all black. He's got the wristbands, the Black Explorer, and he's just fucking mighty, man. And I'm so happy that I saw so many of those shows live, and I still go back and just watch how powerful it was. Like he took Ted Nugent and he took like these combinations of these radical guitar playing frontmen and just put anger into it, and it's another level.
If that Day on the Green show is your favorite show, like what's the one for you that's kind of next in line to that?
Well, any of the Justice tour. Of the Justice tour, and also being in the Snake Pit many nights on the Black Album tour. I even took my mom to the Snake Pit. It was just to be an inch away I mostly watch Hetfield on all of those eras because I just couldn't believe at any time I thought he was just going to lose his mind, but any of the Justice tour, especially when they're playing the whole record from top to bottom. A lot of people didn't like that. I loved it. And, and that was their first arena tour. They've got the Doris up there putting together the scales and everything. It was just, those are guys that I would talk to in the nightclub. And here they are all of a sudden in arenas. And I'm like, oh, well, those guys have been my inspiration my entire life. You know, I'm not good looking. I got to really work hard at anything I do. And I go for the grassroots following. I've been doing this podcast 10 years, basically for free. But it's because I love it, and eventually you get these people that find you, and they've been my inspiration my whole life.
When you look at the period where they're playing the Stone, like, was there a special moment there for you? I'm sure that had to be pretty interesting, like watching them kind of like develop in those years.
Well, it was just amazing because at the same time you have that going on, you have this, Sunset Strip rock going on. And I think it was really just something to where you can look at them and go, oh, I might be able to do this. Because, like I said, that's not traditional good-looking dudes, and it's not traditional songwriting. So you're like, well, it could happen for anyone if you bust your ass. And to go back to the Lars thing, I'm the massive Lars fan because I know exactly what kind of person Hetfield was. I talked to him. The first time I met him, I said, great show tonight. And he said, move on, right to my face. Because I realized later, this guy was so fucking shy that without Lars, no one would know who Metallica was. He did the promoting. He did the flyering. He did the tape trading. He did all of the handshaking while Hetfield was scared to death in the corner with shyness, you know? And that's a true story. He just looked right at me. He's like, move on. And he was standing with Jim Martin, two of the biggest, tallest dudes ever.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, I laughed. I was like, oh, okay. And it was hilarious, you know? But, you know, that band is all of the blueprints of what I think bands should look at. They loved what they were doing. And it wasn't about let's get fans or let's get stardom or let's get radio hits. It was like, we love this because we love Saxon and we love Deep Purple and we love Motorhead. Let's fucking play some music. And that was it, man.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you guys is, like, they have just such important source material. Dean, you just named off several of them, but, like, you know, Diamond Head, Merciful Fate, you can just add a ton of bands. Like, so maybe it's just the fact that they had that source material, but it's just like, it's kind of surprising that, like, there's been a lot of bands that we have seen, you know, that have started out as one thing that have, like, gone and grabbed onto another that happened to be the latest trend of the moment. And Metallica, for a long time, like, never really did that. Like, of course they have their detractors that, like, once you get into, you know, Black Album, Load, Reload, etc., you have people that are going, okay, they grabbed a hold of this and that was cheap and, you know, what a bunch of sellouts. But in the crucial years where they had the opportunity to look at, like, you know, what all of the bands, like a Quiet Riot or a Motley Crue or whoever, and I'm not saying any of that disparagingly, but as they had bands like that in that era that were starting to get, like, big radio hits, like, I'm sure, I mean, we know there are plenty of bands that made that pivot to try to grab a piece of that, and Metallica didn't do that. So, like, why do you guys, like, think that is?
Lars. I mean, his European flavor. Without Lars's European flavor, that band might have just been like a hard rock band, say, sort of Judas Priest meets AC/DC. But with Lars bringing in that total flavor of Merciful Fate, I mean, that guy was fucking... I didn't know who Merciful Fate was. I didn't know what Jägermeister was. You know what I mean? And this guy brought a flavor, man, of that. And I truly believe the European flavor of Lars was what kept that going.
Yeah, I'm just going to duck in real quick because you mentioned Merciful Fate and all that. Like, and I did a heavy metal radio show for a bunch of years, and around the time that Garage Inc. came out, you had certain fans that were, you know, calling that record Garbage Inc. But I tell you what, one of my favorite moments on that package is the Merciful Fate medley, and every single time I would put that across the radio, I would get phone calls from people. You know, literally the guy, I pick up the phone, he'd go, "Holy shit, what is that?" So it's just like. That double CD set is like just testimony spread across 2 CDs of, I mean, case closed. Like, if somebody wants to know, like, you know, where Metallica came from, like, hand them that, and it's like, and those are not easy songs to cover, like really any of them, you know. So, anyway,
to see King Diamond do it on the 30th year anniversary, was just head explosion, because King at the time had the heart attack. He hadn't sang in a long time, and he rolls out and fucking destroys it. And you're just going, that's King Diamond. And they built this special hidden bridge so they could sneak the guest in. So when you're out in line, you wouldn't even know who was in there, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything from you, Ben? Again, I'm so polite yet rude. I stepped right in front of you.
No worries. Dean, I liked what you said there about getting that kind of idea and image from Lars. You know, one thing I think about is Lars leaving Europe to join Metallica, and there's this kind of history of whether it's like James Joyce leaving Dublin to write Ulysses, or, you know, Prince leaving the inner city in Minnesota to Paisley Park to write about inner city stories on Sign of the Times. There's this idea of like leaving your home to understand it better from afar and write about it. And you think about when Metallica starts, 100% of the world's greatest metal bands are English. You know, there's Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and to have that sort of, they kind of, you know, like Bob Dylan brought it all back home on Kill 'Em All and on Ride the Lightning. And I think that, Lars kind of left that perspective, was, you know, trading tapes with James and, you know, having these mail order cassettes and records and appreciating this thing from afar. And I think that's part of what gave them that sort of distinct idea of metal. That wasn't like, and like you said, Matt, not to disparage like Quiet Riot of Motley Crue, that was a totally different thing that they were playing in America.
But, you know, at the same time, you got Motley Crue's first record, which is just fucking straight punk rock. So everybody's influenced by that, and also influenced by some Shout at the Devil. I mean, you know, perfect example, you know, Paul Bailoff and Metallica, and especially Kirk Hammett, who produced and worked with Vane and stuff. These guys were all, you know, fans of all kinds of music, glam, metal, Santana, all of that. I mean, those guys would be at these gigs, you know what I mean? It was definitely a thing of kill posers, but they were there, you know? So there's a mixture of all kinds of stuff going into their chemistry for sure, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting too, like just like that there was a long point, even after they had released Kill 'Em All, like this has kind of been circulating recently, where it's like James was still uncertain that he was the guy that should be in the lead vocal position. So like it's interesting to ponder what it would have been like if John Bush of Anthrax and Armored Saint steps in to take that vocal slot, but like it just would have been a whole different band.
Yeah. I just listened to it yesterday on Sirius, on their Sirius XM channel. They had the John Bush singing one of the tunes. I can't remember.
Four Horsemen.
Yeah, that's it. Sounded fantastic, but what everybody loves about Metallica is kind of that early Motorhead punk rock aggression, you know? I mean, Joey Ramone is not the greatest singer, but he is fucking badass, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what drew me to it, was just like, oh, this is totally different. And also, we got to remember, Hetfield's right hand is playing the most intricate metal of all time at the same time he's singing. So the vocals had to take a little back seat for a while until it becomes the full-on guitar player singer. It's so fucking hard. It's like rubbing your stomach and tapping your head. You're doing two fucking things, and he's doing them to the highest level. He's considered the greatest rhythm player of all time, him and Malcolm, you know? But no one touches his right hand. So to even get some kind of decent vocals is amazing, let alone what he became.
We kind of started, like, I would say, like, favorite Metallica show, and Dean had already kind of laid out the Day on the Green show, so that's why I was asking, like, kind of like next in line. So I'll move to you, Ben. Like, you know, what's kind of your favorite Metallica show?
You know, I was thinking it might just have been for its historical context, but they actually put it up with Metallica Mondays recently on during the pandemic shows, and that big 4 show at Yankee Stadium was really special. That was just just like the lineup and seeing how they all contrasted with each other, and Anthrax and Megadeth and Slayer and Metallica. That was just a great, incredible show. Seeing them do that.
And so that was one you were at then, yeah.
Yeah, I was at that show.
Okay,
yeah.
and yeah, Bryan, was that the show you were at? That was the show you were at, right?
That's the one, yeah, in 2011 at Yankee Stadium.
Nice.
Yeah, I was in junior year of high school at the time, so I skipped school for the day and went up with my friends. We took a bus up to New York, and we saw Mike Portnoy in line outside the stadium, which was fun.
Nice.
But as far as like, I don't think music. I don't think a concert experience will get better than that for me. It was just 8 hours straight of like the best metal ever written.
And so as we enter the next 40 years of Metallica, and maybe I'm kidding, Dean already kind of spoke to this a little bit, but what do you still want to see them do? I mean, Hardwired is the most recent record. Where do they kind of go from here in your fantasy world if you're in control of Metallica?
I've been thinking about this question like all day before this because, and I'm not sure that I have an answer yet, just because I don't know if I want Metallica to do anything else, and I say that because like I am kind of one of the not full-on purists, but when I think of Metallica, I prefer to think of their first decade and their first 5 albums. Those to me are, those albums are like scripture. And all of the stuff that's happened since then, I have enjoyed it to varying degrees. But I just think when you think of, I mean, they're the quintessential heavy metal band. They're really like the archetype as far as a world-conquering, stadium-filling, archetypal heavy metal band. I don't know if there's anything left for them to do. I think if anything, I would like them to just go back to kind of that spirit of adventurousness and fearlessness that I think marked, honestly, everything up to and including Saint Anger. Like, I think their mid-90s and early 2000s output, obviously, has its fair share of critics. It was seen by some people as a failure. But I think that even if those albums were to be classified as failures, they were noble failures, and they were failures that had integrity, because it was the band taking wild swings and occasionally missing by, like, the biggest possible margin. Whereas I think Death Magnetic and Hardwired, while they might be more, consistent listens, they're also albums that are specifically designed to appeal to fans who wanted them to go back to their thrash roots. And while that's good, I would kind of rather just go back to the source and listen to those original records. So I would just like to see them try, I don't know, something different, take some left turns, whatever that might be, but just follow their totally bizarre instincts, because their instincts are bizarre, if history has taught us anything. Now that both bands are back on the road, and it's been almost 30 years, maybe it's time to bury the hatchet with Guns N' Roses too, and relaunch that stadium tour. The 30th anniversary is coming up next year. I know this is totally a pipe dream, but come on, let's make it happen. Let's pack some stadiums again.
Yeah.
Couple of statements here. I see what you're saying with Death Magnetic and Hardwired, but going to Death Magnetic specifically, Cyanide and All Nightmare Long, to name two, are badass tunes. There's some. I don't think you're saying there aren't. Like, there's some really cool tunes on that record. And then Saint Anger. It's funny, much has been made of course, the sound of that record. But the thing that came. Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like, I didn't love the sound of that record, but like the thing that came with it came with that live DVD of them running through the whole record in their studio, and that really kind of gave me a chance to appreciate the songs on that record. So it's just like, there's some gems on that record as well. Like I and they'll still pull this one out. I think there's still a few that they'll pull out, but Frantic is a great song. So,
Killer.
Oh yeah,
the video.
It sounded great that last. It was one of the shows recently. It sounded incredible.
Well,
just the crowd got revved up into it, but yeah.
I think one of the most insane things about Metallica fans is how much they complain about from album to album of sounds and stuff. Bad snare. I don't like the guitar. Well, and one thing I've learned about doing art my whole life is you just have these fucking complainers, man. And they, and like you said, all you need to do is go into your basement and throw on the first 4 records and go away, you know? Because it's insane. I always say promote what's great, not what you hate. It's insane the amount of negative energy these armchair quarterbacks will come with over a snare or over no guitar solos or over, you know, their haircuts. Oh, my God. That one killed me. Their fucking haircuts. These guys suck. And it's like, man, look at it now. They were like, you know, they were wise to keep moving on and evolving, or else, like I said, I mean, look, Slayer are the kings and Ramones are the kings and AC/DC of sticking to what you do. But I think you also have to, you know, not get bored as a human and as an artist. That's why when they do a record with Lou Reed, I'm like, oh, I'm in. Or if they did the symphony. I went to those the first Berkeley Symphony shows, and I'm like, I'm in. Whatever they're going to do, I'm in. I might not spin it again down the road, but I'm not like, God, these guys suck. Fuck these guys. It's like, really? The band that gave you some of the greatest records ever that you supposedly love, now they suck? It's crazy. And then they go to the shows. They'll stand next to you. Man, I can't believe they played Frantic tonight. Oh, yeah, don't worry. They're going to play For Whom the Bells Toll. You're okay, dude.
I would be thrilled to hear Frantic at a show. I have yet to hear that one.
Oh, fuck. I saw them at the Fillmore on that run. They played the Fillmore.
Oh,
that's awesome.
That's cool.
It was fucking pure metal, man.
You know, in fact, Matt, to circle back what you were saying about Death Magnetic, I should be clear. That was when I got into Metallica, and that was the first tour that I saw them on. And I was just looking at the set list. It was at the Wachovia Center in Philadelphia. They played 6 of the 10 songs on that record, and they're all like 8 minutes long. So basically, they played nearly an hour of Death Magnetic material, and it sounded amazing. They opened with That Was Just Your Life. They had these wild lasers. It was amazing. And then I'm pretty sure, just, you know,
how about Spit Out the Bone?
Oh yeah,
I saw them.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, from Hardwired. Yeah, great
amazing song. It's funny. Like that was like 100% the consensus. Like every Metallica fan was like, this is the best song on this album. Like this is one of the best songs of the second half of their career. And it's easy to see why everybody thought that.
I think Sad But True, and Wherever I May Roam are some of the greatest tunes they've ever done in the history of the band. And it's so funny to think about these people that think once Cliff is gone, they suck. And I'm like, really? You're saying Sad But True sucks? Is that what you're saying? That's lunacy, you know?
Ben, I'll throw it over to you. Yeah. You were next in the rotation there.
You know, I think that, you know, Bryan, you talked about them following their bizarre instincts, and, you know, Dean, you mentioned, you know, Slayer and the Ramones. I think that there's this kind of ongoing debate in music about what's it better to be like. Do you want to be the band that do you want to be Slayer or Metallica? You know, the band that consistently does one thing very well or tries new things. And I like that you get both. You know, I love that, you know, AC/DC loses Bon Scott, they lose Malcolm, and they come back sounding just like AC/DC. And putting on the new record, I'm like, this is just what I wanted, like the most dependable thing in the world. I can get AC/DC again. And at the same time, I love knowing that Metallica is always going to do different things, and that I don't know what's next. And, you know, there are some bands I go to for reliability, like AC/DC, and some bands I go to for shocks and surprises, like Metallica. And I love that they do Lulu, and that they do Hardwired, and that they'll, you know, do the Big Four tour, which is a lot of people want in the summer, and then do Lulu, which is what a lot of people don't want in the fall. I love that they are constantly keeping their fans on their toes, and I think that's part of why we keep going back to them, is that because they keep doing new things. So I love the idea that we have no idea where they're going, you know.
And it doesn't seem like they worry about, like, they definitely, like, part of the whole reason that we're here, which gets into the next installment of the Roundtable, that'll be probably out there next week, is the fact that there is the whole fan culture. They're very cool to the fans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But put that to the side. Like, I don't think Metallica is a band that worries about, like, we're going to do this, and they're not worried about, like, you know, what the critics are going to think. They're not necessarily, I don't think, worried about what the fans are going to think. You know, it's just like, you guys laid out some, you know, pretty good moments where it's just like, whether it's Lou Reed and Lulu, you know, or whatever, you know, the memory remains with Marianne Faithfull. That pissed a lot of people off.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's a lot of those moments that as they got kind of, I would say, more creatively comfortable in their skin, they started slinging more creative arrows out there, without really caring, like, what the target was. Like, maybe, you know, one time the target's going to be a high chart position. I don't know if they were really gunning for that. The other time, maybe it's going to be just a complete bomb. Like, I think what is the common thread through all of this is that, like, it's something creatively that's where they were in the headspace at that point, and that's what they wanted to do. And I really respect that, you know, that they've always kind of, I think, stuck to their guns and gone the direction, you know, that they want to go.
Definitely.
I think what people have to understand is, like, most people have never done anything more than 5 years in a row, you know, like their job or had a girlfriend for 5 years or anything like that. So what you're never going to understand until you're in somebody's shoes is when you're working with four guys, you have four different personalities, four different music tastes, four different flavors, and you're working with them for years and years and years. After a while, you're like, hey, let's try something else, you know? And that's what keeps them going, or else they would just be a summer, you know, county fair band going out there playing Nothing Else Matters for the soccer moms and going home, you know? They kept growing as humans and as artists, man. I mean, you know, I know from being an artist all my life, look, I tried comedy at 44 years old. Here I am at 55 now, touring the United States. I did Red Rocks last week with Bill Burr, and it was because I wanted to try something else. Not afraid of failure or whatever. I just want to try stuff in life.
Yeah, different milestones. Like, you know, one time it's like, you know, you're going out on the road with Alice in Chains, which is a big milestone. And then, as you just said, Red Rocks. Like, those are something that, like, you know, years ago you probably didn't have that as like the goal. It's like the goal that a lot of people have is a lot smaller than the eventual heights they eventually scale.
Well, if you love what you're doing, which Metallica does, I mean, they got enough money. These guys have a barrel of money. They're wise, where you don't really see it much like AC/DC. I mean, let's be honest. AC/DC are actual billionaire. You know, a brand is $1 billion. But we're never going to see that. But they love what they do. And so they go and do it. I mean, it's amazing. And when they started, like I said, they started organic. They weren't trying to do hits. They weren't trying to, you know, be famous. They just wanted to go drink some beer and play metal.
I think,
Bryan, anything else on your side of things? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's awesome about Metallica's career is that they genuinely have had it both ways to the fullest extent. I mean, their first 5 albums, they accomplished many lifetimes worth of achievements within their first decade together as a band. They made 5 of the greatest, most popular, most beloved metal albums ever. I mean, they revolutionized an entire genre. And then that afforded them the freedom to do whatever they wanted afterwards. So, like, as far as I'm concerned, anything that they want to do, whether it's for me or not, they've earned the right to try it. Because I know they're going to go back on the road, I'm going to buy a ticket, I'm going to go see them, and they're going to give me at least a dozen of the best songs that have ever been written, and then they'll throw a few curveballs in there too, and, like, I'm going to go along for the ride, because they've already earned that goodwill from me and from every other fan. But also, I think it's really cool. I think Metallica, at the same time, is, like, the ultimate populist band. Like, I love how much they genuinely enjoy doing things for their fans and for themselves. Like, I think one of the coolest moments in their careers when they did that Band in Philly show in the parking lot of the Core State Spectrum back in, like, 97.
Yeah.
Like,
or the Raider game parking lot.
Yeah, things like that, like those
or
moves.
Antarctica.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a handful of stuff. The 30-year anniversary, it's just like, they fucking do it for their fans. It's great.
Yeah, like those were spectacles, and they really had no like need to go to those lengths to do cool things. Like they could do the exact same set list every summer on the road, and they could fill baseball stadiums every night, and it would be fine. But the fact that like they're still finding new ways to work these other nuggets into the set list, or like just do weird, big, spectacular things. I think that speaks to how much they love playing together still. And it's like, I think, as songwriters and musicians, like every musician's career has its ebbs and flows. And sure, there are some times in Metallica's 40-year career where it's like they obviously weren't at the top of their game. But they never stopped. They never lost that excitement and that passion to keep pushing themselves, and that excitement to keep playing with each other, which I think has always been palpable.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to throw one final thing out here, and then I'll give you guys each a chance to like kind of wrap and plug whatever folks need to know. There are, as our editor-in-chief likes to say, no wrong answers here. What's the thing that Metallica did that you didn't dig? Just kind of a moment.
I'll go first. I love them. I defend a lot of their kind of stylistic left turns and their bad PR. I don't like that they're mean to Jason. This guy who dedicated his life to Metallica, who was their biggest fan and just was like dying to be this band. And I think that they've acknowledged that later on. All four of the guys from the band have, but. Yeah, that was hard for me to write about and to work on the book about, seeing how, this guy who was like dedicated Metallica, and they hazed him as a bassist, and they could have got a better bassist. He was so talented, such a great performer, such a great singer, as you were saying, and that was tough. I don't like that they're mean to Jason.
I know Dean has some feelings, but like, isn't it like in the way that like they've released like revised versions of Beatles records and all this to kind of just acknowledge and like, okay, we know we don't need to do this, but here it is. Like, don't you think in a sense that like they should put out a version of Justice with bass?
I think that they shouldn't, just because this is what we're talking about with Metallica for the last 20 minutes, of how it's all about their artistic vision and how they felt at that time and how they feel right now. And I think a bunch of people have already done it on YouTube, so we've already covered that. But I think that it's perfect how it is, and that's a piece in time in their life of where they were. And was it wrong? Man, I never even noticed. I'll tell you the truth. It was just like I was so in awe of the songs. I was like, oh, yeah, there's missing bass. Next, let's move on. Let's go see this. This is crazy, So I don't know, but that's my personal thought. And, I come off as like a crazy – some people will watch this and go, that fucking asshole. But I just love this band so much that I just don't like flack that they get all the time, because no one has been in this band's shoes,
I'll touch on one thing on that, is I think that the lack of bass in that record also makes people look deeper into it. You talk about how people, they say like, they add the And Justice for Jason and Jason for All, and they remix it and they remaster it. They play like, this is the way Cliff might have done it, or this is the way. And I think that, say about those production decisions that inspires people to get more deep into that record, which I love. So I do like it the way it is, but
yeah.
Go on.
All right, Bryan. So a thing that Metallica did that you didn't dig.
Well, it sounds like Jason and the Justice era is at the forefront of everybody's mind right now. Actually, I will say, I'm like, I was game when I heard the trash can snare on Saint Anger. Like, I was fine with that. I was fine with Rick Rubin's mastering of Death Magnetic, but for me, the And Justice for All production is, to me, the one cardinal sin in their discography. That's the songs on And Justice for All are my favorite that Metallica have ever written, but as I have gotten older and like cared more about production, for me personally, that record is almost unlistenable. I can't enjoy it because to me, I hear 3/4 of a band playing on that album. And it's just, that's actually, you asked earlier, what's one thing we'd like to see Metallica do? I really wish that they would release a remixed version of that record. And I know the 30th anniversary came and went, and there was the big reissue, and that didn't happen, so I know it probably won't. But yeah, I would love to hear it. I don't even know if they have the original masters anywhere anymore, but they might have been lost to history. But I would love to hear the actual performances of every band member on that record, brought to the forefront. The YouTube versions are honestly pretty good, but I want to hear straight from the source what Jason's contributions on that record actually sounded like.
I don't know why you did this, but Lars just sent you a text message with a photo of the master tapes. I don't know what that's about. Dean, is there anything that you would take back from the 40-year list of Metallica actions, things that have happened?
Well, I've been pretty vocal about it. I'm not a load reload guy at all. I really don't like that era at all. But that's why I love this to, thrash on people. I kept going though. It was like, okay, this is not my era. What's next? Oh, okay, Saint Anger. Well, this shit is crazy. So I'm not into that era at all. But I love the band, and not once did I go online and go, this is bullshit. And it just was like, fuck, all right, they made some rock records. They're not a great rock band. They're a metal band. And, but that's it. I never talk about it, though. Like I said, promote what's great, not what you hate. But that's the one era that didn't really do much for me.
All right, y'all. Well, so wrapping things up, Ben, what do you have coming up that you want folks to know about?
I guess I'm still doing more book stuff. In December, I'll be doing another talk with the Morbid Anatomy Museum, which is how I basically pushed me into writing a Metallica book, was my discussion and gave me to explore them more different. So that's in December. I'll be talking about Metallica. The book is out now, Body Count book in 2023, and honored to be here with you guys, and I talk Metallica fandom, so thank you.
Yeah, man. And Dean, once you get past these 140 shows this week in Vegas, what else is on tap?
Some of the 2022 arena dates with Bill Burr. So he's doing an arena tour. Yeah, just announced that. And then I'll be headlining all over the place in 2022. And then keep going with the podcast. I got some great guests coming up. Carmine Apiece. Who else did I just interview? I got Mastodon coming back on. And just keep going with the podcast and the stand-up comedy. That's all I can do.
Keep those candles lit, sir. Keep them lit.
Yeah.
All right, and Bryan, last but certainly not least, I mean, among other things, you've been drilling through some good Metallica stuff this year, but, what's coming up UCR-wise or otherwise that you want folks to know about?
Jeez. Musically, my band Transit Method, we're working on our third full-length album right now. We hope to get some tunes really ironed out and do some pre-production at the end of this year, and hopefully get into the studio and start working on some stuff in early 22. No solid time frame yet. We didn't really get to promote our last album, which came out last year, The Madness, because we couldn't play any shows, but we're kind of making up for lost time.
Because of the madness.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's because of you, Bryan.
I know,
you
man.
Put out a record. You put the energy out there. Madness.
Oh, man. Well, when you put it that way, I take it back. Don't promote that at all, Matt. Don't let them know. No,
this is great. I was just going to say, I wanted Dean to come on and tell us Metallica stories, but really I wanted Dean to come on and just to say, Bryan, it's your fault. So we've accomplished a lot tonight.
Right. Who would have thought?
I have a question. Has anybody been invited to the 40 year?
No.
I'm going to the 40 year. I'll be on December.
Are you? Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you going?
I texted Kirk, and because I heard they're doing like a whole week of celebration around the venue, like comedy and their whiskey.
Yeah.
They're going to be doing the whiskey tasting and all that. But
Oh, wow.
I didn't hear back from. So I was hoping to do comedy. I did a show with Jim Brewer, and I did Rock on the Range with Metallica, and it was fucking nuts, man. About 4 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was really hoping to do some comedy at their week celebration. So who knows? Maybe last minute they'll hit me and say, "Oh, hey, yeah, come up." But I haven't heard anything, unfortunately. And the 30 years, when I was at the 30-year anniversaries, as I sat back there, I actually kind of teared up a little bit, to be honest. And on the first night, and I realized that night that this was my Led Zeppelin, and this was the greatest band ever to come out of San Francisco, and what they accomplished. And that was at 30 years. So here we are at 40. So wild.
Yeah, that's something that other people have been complaining about. Is like, oh, they only announced these 2 shows, blah, blah. Like, but you're right, Dean. Like when they said like they were gonna, have all these events, like that there was basically gonna be a week's worth of stuff surrounding these 2 shows in December. Like, knowing Metallica, they're gonna make it a special week. That they themselves know. They know that they have the 30-year shows to top, so they're thinking about that.
Yeah, they got to beat that. And how are you going to beat King Diamond and Mustaine and Ron and fucking, all of that madness that went down? I mean, come on, that was just nuts, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys all so much for like coming together to talk Metallica. I know it's a hardship for all of us to come together and talk about Metallica. As we've proven, this has been painful. So thank you all so much, and Dean especially. Been a lot of fun to have you here. Talking some metal as always. So thank you for your time.
Well, I love the band more than
Thanks
anything.
for having us.
So good to meet you guys, man.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Right on.
You too, man.